Okay, today we're going to review a case of a missing number 30. Uh, so first thing we do is just take a look at the site. So we see some sealers left behind over here. The graft has not fully integrated yet, but it looks like it's going to be close enough. We can see that better in the cross section. We're going to take an approximate width measurement. I like to measure between the cortical plates because if I could fit my implant without having to impinge on the plates, that's my ideal situation anyway. So I've got a little over 5 millimeters between the plates. That's great. I'll probably put a 4.3 or a 5.0 implant in. We'll decide that in a little bit. All right, so we've got some sealer here left over. What I'll do with these is if I see a lucency around there, I'll go in and get the sealer out. Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll make my osteotomy and I'll scrape the inside of it before I place the implant. If I get the sealer out, great. If not, if it's just in there, it's usually benign and will not bother our implant. Okay, so we're going to trace our nerve. So the way we'll do that is, again, we switch between the views here. This is the composite view, but we want to see it in the slice view because we want to be able to get a clear picture of this nerve in its actual 3-dimension. If we're just looking at the composite view and we try and trace it, you're not going to get a clear tracing. So we're going to kind of move this line back and forth until we kind of see a clear canal, and comes to focus about there. And we'll hit add nerve. And we'll start to trace our way through. As I started to lose it here, I'll go into the cross section here and I'll continue to trace it. And I'm just scrolling forward with my wheel. And here you kind of start to lose it. So whenever you start to lose it, you can scroll forward until you get to the mental foramen and then find the medium between there. So this is my last kind of known spot. This forward spot is I know where the medium, where the mental foramen is, so I'm going to kind of split the difference and we'll be just about here. And I like to extend it out and then double click outside of the bone. The reason I do that is then we can see the nerve clearly on the 3D model. Okay, so we've got our nerve traced. So we've got plenty of room till our nerve. And now we're going to look at is our mesial distal length here, because we've got a pretty big molar space here. Now let's take an approximate measurement. Let's set this up. Let's look at our tangential view here. That's going to give us an approximate measurement from contact to contact. So we've got about 12 millimeters from contact to contact. Mish discusses in 12 millimeters. He likes to take a little bit off of the contact points on each spot to add with 14. And in 14 likes to put in 2 premolar sized implants. And while there is room to do that, I find in many cases with 12 millimeters, if you place the implant deep enough, and the platform of the implant is deep enough, you give yourself enough room to create an emergence profile from that depth where you'll close the contact space, not leave yourself with a big triangle for catching food, and the advantage of not having 2 premolars there, which just aesthetically is not fun, and not leaving, if you're putting a single molar, not having a furcation. So for those reasons, I usually would like to put in a single molar, but there has to be enough depth to be able to put that in to give the lab enough room to create a proper emergence profile. So what we'll do next is we'll go into Meshmixer and we will do a wax up. All right, so here we are in Meshmixer. I just opened the upper model. The way Meshmixer works is if you take the 2 scans as an intraoral scan or scanning models and you scan them in occlusion, all you need to do is drag and drop the lower model in and hit append rather than replace, and it'll have the data to put them back into occlusion. And that's what we have here. You see, these were, I think this was done by a CEREC scanner, an older one with some powder. So you see it's kind of has a lot of rough edges and some irregularities. So what we'll do is we'll go to Analysis, Inspector, and just hit Flat Fill and Auto Repair All. And you can just click on the last few that are left there. And there we go. It's just cleaned up that model for us. We can do the same to the top. Again, analysis, inspector. Just hit auto repair all. And it'll just clean up those models for us if we ever want to go back and print them. We want nice clean models. All right, so that closed that up for us. Now let's close the upper model. We're just going to look at the lower now. So we've got a wide space like this. There's two ways we can do a wax up. One is, and the way I'll oftentimes do this is I'll go to Meshmixer, and we will use the Christian Brennis library. But in this case, what I'd rather do is see how big is that molar on the opposite side. And based on that, we'll decide whether or not we're going to want to do 1 molar or 2. So the way we do that, we'll hit select and select this tooth. And we don't have to be real exact, but we want to try and get just about the tooth without any of the neighboring tooth. And we just change the size of the brush to get into the smaller spaces here. All right, it's about right. If you overcolor, what you do is you hit the shift button and click, and it'll erase. But that's basically it. You can add a little bit more here. Not going too crazy. Good. Now once we have it selected, we'll hit B. What that will do is just smooth out the borders for us. We'll hit accept. So now we've got nice smooth borders of this tooth. Beautiful. Now let me add in a little bit more data in here. And again, hit B and clean that up. Good. Okay, so now what we'll do is hit Y to separate that out as a new file and a new piece. And we'll hit the T button, and we can actually take this and move it. So if I need the whole model, I would have duplicated this first. But in this case, I'm just going to drag and drop 19 to the 30 spot. I'm going to flip its sides. And you can mirror this also. I just find this to be a little faster and easier if you really need to get a mirror image of the other tooth. But for this purposes, I'm just really looking for the space. So we see this, the 19 and the 30 spaces were really just about the same. This is a patient's natural tooth. I'm going to make it a drop wider just to close up those contacts nicely. And that's about where we're at. So in this case, when I see it's exactly the same size as the previous, the opposite side molar, I'm usually going to lean towards doing 1 implant. Again, unless I really don't have a lot of room at depth and I'm really stuck, then I'll do 2. But if I can avoid doing 2, I usually like to. All right, let's just look how that looks in occlusion. Okay, we're pretty good there. And again, we're just looking for spacing here. We could turn that off. What we'll do now is select both models. So now we're looking at both the lower and the new part, and we're going to hit combine. And now that's going to create a new model that has this number 30 as a wax up. And now let's go back into Blue Sky, and we'll bring in both files. Okay, so now we're back in Blue Sky Plan, and we're going to drag in the lower model. And this used to be a really tedious process of matching points, but Blue Sky's done a good job of having the software do the work for us. So I'm going to click Mandible and hit OK. And if you look at this scan, I tell everyone who's taken my course before, when you take these scans, make sure that the patient is biting on a bite tab because you want the cusp tips separate. It just gives you a better mesh when things come back in. As you see here, I did a really good job even without that, but it's just much easier to scan in when the patients are discluded and you can see all the cusp tips. But if you see here, what we're looking for is in cross-section, we want to see a really tight wrap of the tooth in the model. That lets us know that we've got a nice merge here. And you can see that's indeed the case. Let's go through a couple more teeth. And yeah, you see a nice tight merge there. Once we have that, now we're going to take that second model that we exported from Meshmixer. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's file. Export. I'm going to do an STL binary. And let's say number 30 waxup. Great. And now we're going to take that file and drag it drop back in. We'll tell it the mandible again, and it will oftentimes get it right on this alone. But because we have got one tooth different here, or sometimes multiple teeth different, it won't get it exactly. The way we'll tell if it's exact is you want to see blue and green kind of meshing in between each other. And we can go back to the surface list here, the surface panels. And let's turn off the original, which is the actual CT scan. And we want to see that there's blue and green kind of meshing within each other as they are here. So this was actually a pretty good merge. But if it's not, what you'll do is you go back to the model manipulation and you go to 30 waxup and you're going to align that to a model. I'll say the S lower here, but not using points because we want it to work. It'll match up the points itself. If you want to get something specific, you can use points, but here it'll do it automatically if you do not click align using points. You can see that's just about the same. It's really merged in there very tightly. The only thing we're really seeing different here is the number 30 waxup. Okay, so now we're going to go back. I'm going to go to surfaces and make sure that they're both visible, and we see the number 30 tooth. We see an outline of it here. So we see our tooth pretty much where we wanted an inclusion. We see the outline of our soft tissue in green. And now let's go ahead and add an implant. So we're going to go to mandible. Let's add a max. And let's start off with a 4.3 by 10. Let's see what we got here. And again, I want to look at this from every angle. So we want this to be dead center. The teeth, the number 31 and the number 29 teeth are pretty close to parallel. That's not always the case. You sometimes will have one tooth that's kind of leaning towards the other. So we're going to try and split the difference here between those roots. And that should bring us to just about where the septum is, but not necessarily always. Can rotate this and drop here. And then we're going to look, where is this exiting? We want it to be exiting just about by the central fossa. So I'm going to bring it maybe a drop more distal. And maybe, or drop more, let's say drop more mesial, and maybe upward this guy a little bit. And that's about where we want it. Just about through the central fossa. Maybe we'll bring it over towards the buccal a drop. And actually, when I look at it here, we can just angle this just a hair over to the buccal. And see now we're really just dead on through that central fossa. So that's where we want our implant to sit. And again, these cases are not easy. When you see the bone is not fully formed on those areas and the septum is still present, what will happen in more cases than not is that the implant will, as you're drilling, the osteotomy will fall into one of those socket spaces. And you'll end up with an implant that's too far mesial or too far distal in a space that's already wide to begin with, and you're going to be left with a big foot impaction. So in these cases, it's critically important to use a guide to the very least get your pilot drill in and make sure to maintain that throughout. So a guide is really critically important here. So once we have our implant set up, now we can turn off our blue model, which is where that tooth is. And we'll go to our implant list. We'll turn on our sleeve. We're going to use our Max fully guided surgical kit. And that'll put our sleeve here. Our sleeve is sticking out of the model nicely, so we don't have to make any adjustments there. And then we're going to go on to our panel of our guide. And I'm going to start to draw our curve. So I'm not a big fan of making big guides. What I find is you need a couple of teeth on each side, 1 to 2 teeth on each side to hold on to a guide. The more and longer your guide is, what I find is it just introduces more inaccuracies. You're just looking for a couple of cusp tips to hold on to this guide. So we're really not making it big. So I'm hitting the shift key here, and you'll see it'll turn to crosshairs. Sorry, I gotta hit draw curve first. So there's a slight collision between the guide tube and the model, but it's not going to be a problem here. I'm just drawing an outline, and I'm going to go 2 teeth on one side, 1 tooth on the other. If you want to go to that cusp, you can, but again, I'm a bigger fan of less is more. And there's our basic outline. And that's about right. What another little trick I like to do is I like to put in a window, not to show me where the teeth are, because you'll see we'll have plenty of visibility with a smaller guide. I like to put a window at the edge of the guide, and I'll show you why that is. I'll make one side with one of these windows and one without. We're just going to extend it out in all directions. Good, and then we'll hit Create Surgical Guide. And the faster process that you have, the faster this will go. Good, and now you'll see the difference. I like to see a sharp edge between my guide and the tooth, so that when I see this, I see that this is a sharp demarcation. I want no air between the tooth and the guide. That's how I know it's seating properly. I already see that on one side, and I see that on the other side. And truth is, I'd like to see it at the edge of the molar here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remake this guide. We're going to go back to our lower model. We're going to hide the guide that was made. And we'll go back to Draw Curve. And it'll just show us where we had those pieces before. We'll show the windows that was already there. We'll leave that window. I'm going to just add one more in the corner here. Okay, now you see there's a clean, sharp border on the outside, so I can see I'm going to be definitely seated over here on this side. I'm going to see cleanly I'm seated on this side. Same here on this premolar, I see I'm seated, and the mesial of this premolar, I'm also seated. And that's really as big a guide as you need. I can add some text. I'll remind myself that I'm planning a 4.3 by 10 millimeter implant in there. I haven't changed my offsets, so I'll leave all of that alone. And if you want to put the patient's initials in there, well, let's do that on the other side. Apply the text. And you can either emboss it as it is here, or you engrave it, whichever you prefer. And let's just add in the patient's initials. And the more you zoom in or out, it will be the size of the initials. Make those a little bit larger, apply the text. And that'll emboss it there. All right, so that's our guide. Really, in a few simple steps, just hit Save Surgical Guide. And as long as you have some exports there, you are finished. And this implant case should end up very straightforward. We're doing all our work on the computer, so that by the time we get to surgery, we're not thinking about where's this implant going to go. We already know. The guide will put the implant as we planned it, and the surgery should be done in a fraction of the time. Hope this helps. Questions and comments below. And as always, you can email me at implantmss@gmail.com with any questions. Send your scans, and I'm happy to review them on these videos as well.